Mr. Speaker, sir, I thank Mr. Thomas Swa, Mr. Louis Ng, and Mr. Asmun Ahmad for their support of the bill. As all three of them mentioned, these amendments are very important, and we have to see how these amendments fit with our overall strategic goal for Singapore, which is to encourage companies to continue to undertake investment, expand their capabilities, and create new jobs. To do so, our economic agencies require a suite of tools to engage our companies. And therefore, the government regularly reviews our incentives and schemes, be it tax incentives or non-tax incentives, to ensure that they continue to be relevant and effective as our economic and operating environment continues to evolve. To be in line with international standards, and in particular, to align ourselves with BEPS guidelines. BEPS stands for Base Erosion and Profit Sharing. This bill will therefore amend the legislation to exclude intellectual property or IP income from pioneer service companies and development expansion incentive companies. Companies that are committed to undertake substantive economic investments and create good job opportunities in Singapore can continue to benefit from the PSC and the DEI schemes. Meanwhile, we will continue to encourage the use of IPs arising from a taxpayer's research and development activities under the new IP Development Incentives, or IDI. Taxpayers can apply for IDI regardless of whether they are currently on the PSC and the DEI or not. As for the IDI itself, the government is currently in consultation with the companies, and the incentive will be legislated in the Income Tax Act consequently. Secondly, in response to Mr. Louis Ng's point about the definition of IP income, I agree that companies need clarity to plan their businesses and to execute their growth strategies. In this regard, the government has proactively reached out to the companies and consulted them on the draft legislation. This, among other things, include the definition of IP income, which will be made clear in the subsidiary legislation. As I mentioned in the earlier debate in 2016, it is better for us, it's more effective for us to define IP income in the subsidiary legislation than in the main legislation. So the objective is still achieved. You have transparency, clarity, but at the same time you have more responsiveness and flexibility by doing so in subsidiary legislation. So these amendments in this bill will help to provide our companies that have invested in or are continuing to invest in Singapore with more certainty. This is because our incentives have been reviewed by the international community and they meet international tax standards ahead of many other countries and jurisdictions which are still in the midst of reviewing their tax regimes. We remain committed to being a competitive location for anchoring substantive economic activities and will continue to monitor global developments. On Mr. Louis Ng's point about fair employment practices, we support that, and we agree that companies recognize the value of having fair practices in place. This is because by hiring fairly and based on merit, companies would have access to a wider talent pool and reap the benefits from increased productivity. The Singapore government, of course, helps our companies to develop the career of Singaporeans in their employment. In our engagements with companies, we work with them to develop training and career development programs for their employees. For example, the Skills Future Leadership Development Initiative, or the LDI, is one such scheme that employers registered or incorporated in Singapore can leverage on to create and enhance in-house leadership development programs. These programs, which are company-centric and sector-specific, can also be implemented through collaborations with external training providers. Mr. Thomas Chua has accurately pointed out the value of having both MNCs and local enterprises in our ecosystem to drive our economic growth. Mr. Louis Ng and Mr. Asmun Ahmad have asked how small and medium enterprises can benefit from these amendments. In general, our tax incentives, including the ones in the EEIA, are open to application by all companies, regardless of size, as long as they're able to commit to making significant contributions to our economy. In this instance, with the liberalization of the integrated investment allowance, the SMEs can enjoy more flexibility in their business arrangements with their foreign counterparts. I also like to clarify one of the points that Mr. Thomas Chua mentioned regarding the local industry upgrading program, or the LIUP. I'd like to clarify that LIUP was not phased out, but rather subsumed under the Partnership for Capability Transformation, or the PACT scheme. As you remember, in the LIUP scheme, the scheme essentially caters to the relationship of our local SMEs who are suppliers to the multinationals or the large companies. But we think the relationship can go beyond that of just a supplier relationship, and therefore we've expanded the LIUP scheme to the PACT scheme, which encompasses different forms of collaborations and partnerships beyond just a supplier relationship. The second point that Mr. Chua mentioned about the new Section 97 ZHA, this has always been our practice, that if the companies do not adequately meet up to their commitments set out in the incentive, we will withdraw the incentives and recover the incentives made to them. So this is nothing new. So this section is just to regularize our practice. Government will continue to recover the IIA awarded if the company fails any conditions or breaches the legislative amendments. I'd like to highlight that there are no errant cases in the last 5 years for IIA, and the current amendments are therefore not reactionary in nature, but are being made for legislative clarity. Mr. Speaker, the government will continue to review our incentives and schemes regularly to ensure that they remain relevant and support capability development and the needs of our companies. Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to move.